Personal log, Riker Kea. Date, March 15th, 2024. Location, Kea Ranch, West Texas. The ash started falling at 0600 hours this morning. I've been tracking weather patterns across these plains for 15 years, ever since I came back from deployment, and I've never seen anything like this. Each flake burns when it touches skin, not hot, but wrong. Chemical wrong. The kind of burn that makes your teeth ache and your stomach turn. My grandfather's Geiger counter is singing. The old Ludlam Model 3 he carried through the Nevada tests in '53, the one that kept 3 generations of Keas alive when the government miscalculated fallout patterns. The needles dancing past yellow into red, clicking like angry insects. I radio checked the other ranches at dawn. The Henderson's place, 12 miles north, their cattle are down. All of them. Jim Henderson's voice cracked when he described the foam around their mouths, the way their eyes went milky white before they dropped. The Vasquez spread to the east reports similar losses. 23 head of prime Angus, dead in the pasture with this glowing ash coating their hides like poisonous snow. The shelter network Granddad built still holds. 18 bunkers scattered across our section of the plains, each one dug according to his blueprints from the Cold War. Steel-reinforced concrete, lead-lined walls, filtered air systems that can run for weeks on the old generators. He always said the next one would come from the sky, not the Russians. Looking at this ash, I'm starting to think the old man was right about more than just storm patterns. Jaden's been checking the radiation readings every hour. My little brother inherited Granddad's obsession with the counters. We've got 6 of them now, all calibrated, all screaming the same warning. The ash isn't just radioactive, it's getting worse. Background radiation has tripled since sunrise, and the storm clouds building on the horizon glow with an orange light that makes my skin crawl. The wind tastes like copper and burnt metal. When I breathe too deep, my lungs burn the way they did during the chemical exercises in basic training. The air itself feels wrong, thick, clingy, like it's trying to stick to your insides. I've started keeping a wet cloth over my mouth, but even that's not enough. The ash finds its way through everything. Miles Gendron called the emergency meeting for 1,400 hours. Every ranch family within 50 miles is supposed to gather at the old community center, but I can see the problem already. The roads are disappearing under this toxic snow. The county highway is barely visible, marked only by the fence posts that still poke through the growing drifts of glowing ash. I found tracks this morning. Coyote prints in the ash, but wrong. Too big, with claw marks that cut too deep into the hardpan. The spacing suggests an animal moving with purpose, not the random wandering of a pack looking for carrion. These tracks lead straight toward the Henderson place. When I tried to follow them, my counter started screaming, and I had to back off. The emergency broadcast system keeps cycling the same message. Seek immediate shelter. Avoid exposure to atmospheric particulates. This is not a test, but they're not saying what caused this or how long it's supposed to last. The static between broadcasts is getting worse, filled with a high-pitched whine that makes my fillings ache. I've activated Protocol 7, Granddad's designation for unknown atmospheric contamination. All family members report to the main shelter within 4 hours. Emergency supplies distributed. Water reserves sealed. The old man's protocols never failed us before, and I'm betting my family's lives they won't fail us now. But something's different about this storm. The ash doesn't just fall, it moves. Swirls in patterns that don't match the wind. Accumulates in places that should be clear. And underneath it all, there's a sound. Like breathing. Like the earth itself is trying to exhale poison. The sun's disappearing behind the storm front. The sky is turning the color of old copper, and the ash is starting to glow brighter as darkness falls. Whatever's coming, it's bigger than a weather event. This feels like the end of something. I'm sealing this log in the emergency cache. If someone finds it, know that we tried to warn everyone. The old protocols might not be enough this time. The counter's clicking faster now. Personal log, Riker Kea. Date, March 16th, 2024. Location, main shelter, Kea Ranch. The storm hit at 0300 hours. I've lived through Texas tornadoes, hailstorms that could kill cattle, and dust storms that turn day to night. This isn't weather. This is something else entirely, something that screams when the wind picks up and burns everything it touches. The ash doesn't just fall anymore, it hunts. It swirls against the shelter's blast doors in patterns that follow the ventilation intakes, probing for weakness like it's alive. When I checked the external cameras, the drifts had grown to 12 feet overnight, but they're not random accumulations. They're shaped, carved into channels that direct the wind toward our emergency exits. Jaden's been working nonstop to reinforce the filtration systems. He's got Granddad's blueprints spread across the main table, cross-referencing the original shelter designs with modern radiation shielding techniques. The kid's got an engineer's mind trapped in a rancher's body. He understands the old man's work better than I ever did. The lead shielding's holding, he reported at 0800, his voice hoarse from breathing recycled air. But the ash is corrosive. It's eating through the external seals faster than the original specs accounted for. We've got maybe 48 hours before it starts seeping through the ventilation system. 48 hours. The emergency supplies are calculated for 2 weeks minimum, but that assumed clean air. If this poison starts leaking in, we'll be dead long before we run out of food. The radio's been crackling all morning with distress calls from the other ranches. What I'm hearing doesn't make sense. The Martinez family, 15 miles south, their eldest son was found outside their shelter at dawn, his body burned from the inside out. They say his skin was translucent, like the ash had dissolved everything underneath. The Geiger counter readings from their location are off the charts. Jim Henderson's last transmission came at 0630. Something's wrong with the livestock. The dead ones, they're moving. Not breathing, but moving. God help us, they're moving. Then static. I tried reaching the county emergency coordinator, but the official channels are just playing that same recorded message. The static's getting worse, filled with sounds that make my teeth ache. Sometimes I swear I can hear voices in it, not words, but something like screaming, like the air itself is in pain. The moral calculus is eating at me. We've got enough supplies for the family, maybe 1 or 2 neighbors if we stretch it. But there are 17 families in our section, scattered across 200 square miles of poison wasteland. The emergency protocols say to secure your own people first, but every rancher's code I was raised on says you help your neighbors. Miles Gendron managed to get through on the CB around 1,000 hours. His voice was barely recognizable, strained and hollow. Riker, you need to know, this isn't random. The ashfall pattern, the way it's concentrating, it's deliberate. Someone did this to us. Before I could respond, his transmission cut to static filled with what sounded like metal grinding against metal. I've been studying the weather data from the last week, trying to piece together what happened. The atmospheric readings show something launching from the east, a massive release of particulates that moved against the prevailing winds. This wasn't an accident. This was targeted. The external temperatures dropped 15 degrees since yesterday, but the ash glows brighter in the cold. Through the periscope, I can see it pulsing like a heartbeat, synchronized across the entire landscape. The drifts move in waves, flowing toward populated areas like a slow-motion avalanche of poison. Jaden found tracks circling the shelter. Not coyote prints this time, something bigger. The impressions are burned into the ash like acid, and they're fresh. Whatever made them was here while we slept, testing our defenses. I've made the decision. We're staying put for now, but I'm preparing the emergency broadcast equipment. If this gets worse, if the shelters start failing, someone needs to warn the settlements to the west. The big ranches near Amarillo, the farming communities that might still have time to evacuate. But every instinct tells me it's already too late. The ash is spreading faster than any natural phenomenon. The storm clouds on the horizon pulse with that same orange light, and they're moving against the wind patterns. Whatever's driving this contamination, it's not finished with us. The Geiger counter's clicking has changed rhythm. Instead of the random static of background radiation, it's pulsing in regular intervals. Like a countdown. Jaden's calling for me. Something's happening to the air filtration system. The ash is starting to seep through the seals, and it's not just glowing, it's singing. High-pitched, like metal under stress, like the earth itself is screaming. Personal log, Riker Kea. Date, March 17th, 2024. Location, main shelter, Kea Ranch. Mason Desbians arrived at 0545 hours, half dead and carrying proof that will damn us all. I found him collapsed against the shelter's outer airlock, his hazmat suit torn and smoking from ash burns. The external cameras showed him crawling across 2 miles of poisoned wasteland, dragging a waterproof case behind him. When I hauled him inside, his Geiger counter was screaming louder than ours. Nuclear facility, he gasped, blood speckling his lips. Sabotage. They shut down the cooling systems deliberately. Mason worked as a safety inspector for Lone Star Nuclear, 60 miles east of here. The case he brought contains maintenance logs, sabotage reports, and corporate communications that read like a death warrant for half of Texas. The cooling system failures weren't accidents. They were orchestrated. 3 weeks ago, he whispered, still fighting for breath. Executive order came down from corporate, shut down the emergency protocols, said it was cost-cutting, but the paperwork was backdated. They planned this. The documents are damning. Deliberate disabling of containment systems. Falsified safety reports. Emergency cooling pumps physically disconnected by contracted saboteurs. The radioactive ash isn't fallout from an accident. It's weaponized waste, deliberately released to clear the land for mineral extraction. Our ranches, our lives, our families, were all collateral damage in a corporate land grab. While Mason recovered, the attacks began. The first breach came at 0800. Something tore through the shelter's ventilation intake, ripping steel mesh like paper. The emergency seals held, but barely. Through the external cameras, I watched a pack of coyotes circle the shelter, except they weren't coyotes anymore. The radiation had changed them, elongated their limbs, fused their ribs into external armor plating. Their eyes glowed with the same orange light as the ash, and when they howled, the sound resonated through the shelter walls like a tuning fork struck against bone. Jaden was monitoring the air quality sensors when the first one got inside. A maintenance hatch I'd forgotten about, sealed with rubber gaskets that the ash had dissolved. The creature squeezed through an opening barely 8 inches wide, its mutated bones collapsing and reforming as it moved. I put 3 rounds center mass before it went down. The bullets barely slowed it. The thing's blood was luminescent, glowing brighter than the ash, and where it splattered on the concrete, the floor started smoking. Jesus Christ, Jaden breathed, staring at the corpse. What did they do to them? The documents Mason brought have the answer. The nuclear waste wasn't just released, it was modified. Experimental isotopes, designed to accelerate genetic mutation in living tissue. The corporations didn't just want to poison the land, they wanted to make it uninhabitable for anything that might interfere with their mining operations. The coyotes were just the beginning. By 1200 hours, we had identified 17 separate breach attempts. The creatures are learning, adapting their attacks based on our defenses. They probe the weaker seals, test the electrical systems, even attempt to dig through the shelter's foundation. Their intelligence is growing as fast as their mutations. The main shelter's structural integrity is compromised. The ash has been eating through the external supports for 3 days, weakening the steel framework that holds the entire complex together. Granddad's blueprints didn't account for corrosive fallout this aggressive. The shelter that protected 3 generations of Kayas is dying around us. Mason's been working through the corporate communications, mapping the scope of the sabotage. It's not just our facility, he said, his voice hollow. They hit 6 reactors across the state. The ash clouds are designed to merge, create a contamination zone covering 12,000 square miles. 12,000 square miles. Every ranch, every small town, every family that called this part of Texas home. All of it sacrificed for mineral rights and corporate profit. The radio silence makes sense now. The emergency coordination centers were deliberately left out of the loop. The government agencies that should be responding are either bought off or kept in the dark. We're not victims of an accident. We're targets in a war we didn't know was being fought. The external cameras show the ash drifts reshaping themselves, forming geometric patterns that channel the wind toward populated areas. It's not random distribution, it's tactical deployment. The contamination is being actively directed, concentrated where it will do the most damage to human habitation. At 1,500 hours, we lost contact with the Martinez family. Their emergency beacon went dark mid-transmission. The last thing we heard was Maria Martinez screaming about something breaking through their shelter's main door. Then static, filled with sounds like metal tearing and bones breaking. Jaden's been working frantically to reinforce our remaining defenses, but the math is against us. The shelter's filtration system is failing faster than we can repair it. The structural supports are compromised. The mutated coyotes are learning to work together, coordinating their attacks. We have maybe 12 hours before this place becomes uninhabitable. Mason's still conscious, still fighting through the radiation sickness that's eating him alive. There's a way to stop it, he whispered. The reactor's emergency shutdown protocols. If someone can reach the facility, activate the containment systems. He didn't finish the sentence. We both know what he's suggesting. The facility is 60 miles through contaminated wasteland, swarming with mutated predators and toxic ash storms. It's a suicide mission. But it's the only way to stop the contamination from spreading further west, toward the settlements that might still have time to evacuate. The creatures are gathering outside. Through the periscope, I can see them massing in the ash drifts, their glowing eyes fixed on our shelter. They're waiting for something, planning something. The Geiger counter's rhythm has changed again. Instead of the steady pulse, it's accelerating, building toward something. The ash outside is glowing brighter, pulsing in sync with the radiation readings. Whatever's coming next, it's bigger than coyotes. Personal log, Riker Kea. Date, March 17th, 2024. Location, Emergency Relay Station, Highway 287. Time, 1847 hours. The storm hit like God's own wrath. I'm transmitting this from what's left of the highway relay station, 40 miles from the ranch. The main shelter collapsed 6 hours ago. Everything I knew, everything my family built over 3 generations, buried under 10 feet of radioactive ash. The creatures weren't waiting for reinforcements. They were waiting for the storm. At 1,200 hours, the western horizon lit up like a nuclear sunrise. The ash clouds that had been drifting across the plains suddenly accelerated, pulled together by winds that screamed across the wasteland at over 90 miles per hour. The temperature dropped 30 degrees in minutes, and the air itself became visible, a roiling wall of luminescent death advancing across Texas. Mason was barely conscious when the perimeter alarm started screaming. "Pressure wave," he gasped, pointing at the seismic readings. "The other reactors, they're going critical." Through the external cameras, I watched the ash drifts reshape themselves into towering spirals, funneling the contamination directly toward populated areas. The geometric patterns I'd noticed earlier weren't random. They were part of a larger design, channels carved in the landscape to direct the fallout exactly where the corporations wanted it. The mutated coyotes sensed what was coming. They abandoned their siege of our shelter and fled east, their glowing forms disappearing into the ash like ghosts. Even the predators knew to run from what was approaching. Jaden was in the communications bay when the first impact hit. The shelter's steel framework groaned and buckled as the pressure wave rolled over us. Emergency lights flickered and died. The air filtration system gave a mechanical scream and went silent. "The auxiliary generators," Jaden shouted over the noise. "If we can get them online." The ceiling caved in before he could finish. 20 tons of radioactive ash and twisted steel buried the communications array, trapping my brother in the debris. I could hear him calling for help, his voice growing weaker as the toxic dust filled his lungs. I tried to reach him, spent 20 minutes digging through rubble that burned my hands even through thick gloves. But the ash was too heavy, too corrosive. Every shovelful I removed was replaced by 2 more as the storm fed more contamination through the breach. Jaden's voice went quiet at 1,315 hours. The shelter's structural integrity failed completely at 1330. The main support beams, eaten away by 3 days of corrosive ash, finally snapped under the weight of the storm. I barely made it to the emergency exit before the entire complex collapsed, taking with it my family's legacy and my brother's body. The wasteland outside was worse than anything I'd imagined. The ash storm had transformed the familiar landscape into an alien hellscape. Radiation readings were off the charts. The Geiger counter I'd grabbed from the shelter was clicking so fast it sounded like static. Visibility was down to 10 feet in any direction. I wrapped myself in every piece of protective gear I could carry and started walking. The ranch was dead. The shelter was gone. But Mason's mission documents were still sealed in their waterproof case, and Miles Gendron's emergency beacon was still transmitting from the community center 12 miles south. The journey took 4 hours through toxic hell. The ash burned through my boots, my gloves, my respirator seals. I followed the highway markers when I could see them, using the abandoned vehicles as navigation points. Cars and trucks sat buried up to their windows, their occupants long dead, their bones glowing through the windshields like radioactive Christmas ornaments. The creatures were everywhere. Not just coyotes now. The storm had mutated everything it touched. Cattle with too many legs and rib cages that had grown outside their skin. Birds with wingspan measured in yards, their feathers replaced by luminescent quills that hummed with electrical discharge. All of them moving with the same eerie coordination, like pieces of a larger organism. I reached the community center at 1,730 hours. The building was intact but barely recognizable. The ash had fused with the exterior walls, creating a shell of radioactive glass that glowed from within. Miles had barricaded the main entrance with everything he could find: desks, filing cabinets, even a pickup truck dragged inside through the loading dock. Inside, I found 47 survivors. Ranch families, townspeople, even a few kids whose parents had died in the initial contamination. Miles had organized them into work crews, rationing supplies and maintaining the building's improvised radiation shielding. The man was a born leader, keeping people focused on survival instead of panic. "Riker," he said when he saw me. "Thank God. We lost contact with your shelter hours ago." "Jayden?" I shook my head. Miles understood without words. He'd lost people too. We all had. The community center's situation was desperate. The building's structural integrity was compromised, the radiation shielding was failing, and they had maybe 6 hours of breathable air left. The storm was still intensifying, and the ash was beginning to eat through the roof. "We need to evacuate," Miles said. "Get everyone to the highway maintenance depot. It's got better shielding, generator power." The depot was 8 miles through the heart of the storm. Moving 47 people, including children and elderly, across that distance in these conditions was suicide. But staying was guaranteed death. Miles volunteered to lead the evacuation, while I stayed behind to coordinate with any other survivors. It was the logical choice. He knew the local families, knew who needed extra help, knew the route to the depot. But we both understood what it really meant. The evacuation began at 1800 hours. Miles led them out through the loading dock, into the radioactive hell that Texas had become. I watched through the security cameras as long as I could, until the ash storm swallowed them completely. The building held for 30 minutes after they left. Then the roof supports gave way, and the entire structure collapsed into the growing ash drifts. If anyone had stayed behind, they would have been buried alive. I made it to this relay station by following the power lines. The emergency broadcast equipment still works, barely. I've been transmitting evacuation warnings to any survivors who might still have working radios. The response has been mostly silence, broken by occasional screams that cut through the static. Mason's documents are still with me. The proof of corporate sabotage, the reactor locations, the shutdown protocols. If I can reach the primary facility, if I can activate the emergency containment systems, maybe I can stop this from spreading further. The storm's eye is moving east now, carrying death toward Austin, toward Houston, toward cities that still don't know what's coming. The corporate plan is working perfectly. By tomorrow morning, half of Texas will be uninhabitable wasteland, ready for mineral extraction. But the storm revealed something else. The ash patterns aren't just directing contamination, they're creating a geometric grid across the landscape, a foundation for something bigger. The corporations aren't just clearing the land, they're terraforming it, building something that requires a radioactive environment to function. The creatures are part of it too. They're not random mutations, they're engineered, designed to thrive in the contaminated environment the corporations are creating. The perfect workforce for whatever comes next. Miles and his evacuation group haven't responded to radio calls. Either they made it to the depot and their communications are down, or the storm took them. Either way, I'm alone now, the last witness to what happened here. The facility is 20 miles northeast. The storm is moving in the same direction. If I time it right, I can use the eye wall's trailing edge as cover, stay in the relative calm while the main surge passes. It's a one-way trip. The radiation exposure alone will kill me within hours. But Mason's shutdown protocols might work. The reactor's emergency systems might still be functional. If I can reach the control room, if I can activate the containment protocols, the storm's glow is intensifying. The ash is beginning to fall in geometric patterns again, preparing for the next phase of whatever the corporations have planned. I need to move while I still can. If anyone receives this transmission, remember, this wasn't an accident. This was murder on a planetary scale. The corporations turned our home into a weapon, and they're not finished. The Texas contamination is just the beginning. The ash patterns are spreading. The storms are moving. God help us all, I think they're going nationwide. Personal log, Riker Kea. Date, March 18th, 2024. Location, Lone Star Nuclear Facility Perimeter. Time, 0347 hours. I found Miles at dawn, or what passes for dawn in this poisoned world. The highway maintenance depot was a tomb. The building had held against the storm for maybe an hour before the ash ate through the reinforced concrete. 47 people, including children, buried under 20 feet of radioactive debris. The emergency beacon was still transmitting, its signal growing weaker as the ash consumed the electronics. Miles had made it to within 50 yards of the depot entrance when the building collapsed. I found him beneath a concrete slab, his body shielding 3 kids from the worst of the debris. The radiation burns covered 70% of his body, but he was still alive when I dug him out. "Did they make it?" he whispered through lips that were bleeding radioactive plasma. I couldn't tell him the truth. Not with his last breath. "They're safe," I lied. "All of them." He smiled and closed his eyes. Miles Gendron died believing he'd saved them. It was the only mercy left in this poisoned world. The facility loomed ahead of me like a monument to corporate evil. 6 massive cooling towers, their concrete shells cracked and leaking luminescent steam. The main reactor building was intact but transformed. The ash had fused with the exterior walls, creating a surface that pulsed with its own internal light. The whole complex hummed with an electrical charge that made my teeth ache. Mason's access codes still worked. The corporate saboteurs had been thorough in disabling the safety systems, but they'd left the basic infrastructure intact. Why destroy what you planned to rebuild? The control room was a cathedral of destruction. Banks of monitors displayed radiation readings that defied comprehension. The reactor core temperature was holding steady at levels that should have triggered automatic shutdown weeks ago. The cooling systems weren't just disabled, they'd been modified, redirecting the waste heat into the atmosphere through the damaged towers. The corporate communications were all here, archived in the facility's hardened servers. I spent 2 hours reading through the files, each document revealing another layer of the conspiracy. The Texas operation wasn't just land clearing, it was a prototype. Project Manifest Destiny. That's what they called it. Controlled nuclear contamination of economically non-viable regions, followed by terraforming operations designed to extract rare earth minerals from the irradiated soil. The mutations weren't side effects, they were the goal. Engineered organisms designed to process radioactive waste into valuable compounds. The creatures I'd been fighting, the mutated coyotes and cattle, they were biological mining equipment. Living factories that could survive in environments too toxic for human workers. The corporations had turned evolution itself into a tool of industrial exploitation. But Texas was just the beginning. The files showed deployment schedules for facilities across the rural United States. Montana, Wyoming, the Dakotas, anywhere with low population density and high mineral value. 50 million Americans living in zones marked for economic optimization. The geometric ash patterns weren't random. They were growth templates, designed to channel the contamination into specific shapes. The corporate planners had mapped out entire regions, redesigning the landscape to maximize extraction efficiency. Rivers would be diverted, mountains would be leveled, ecosystems would be replaced with industrial organisms. And the government knew. Congressional briefings, EPA approvals, Pentagon coordination. The accidental reactor failures were scheduled years in advance, synchronized with mineral surveys and land acquisition programs. They were planning to remake America into a corporate extraction zone, with the survivors herded into designated population centers, surrounded by radioactive wasteland. The truth was worse than anything I'd imagined. My family's ranch, Jaden's life, Miles's sacrifice, all of it just collateral damage in a war against the American landscape itself. I found Mason in the facility's medical bay, barely alive but still working. The radiation sickness had eaten through his body like acid, but his mind was sharp. He'd been using the facility's computers to map the contamination spread, tracking the storm systems as they moved across the continent. "It's accelerating," he said, his voice barely audible. "The other sites are coming online ahead of schedule. They're going to contaminate half the country within 6 months." The medical bay's monitors showed his vital signs failing. Organ shutdown, bone marrow collapse, neurological degeneration. The radiation had consumed him from the inside out, but he was still fighting to complete his work. "The shutdown protocols," I said. "Can they stop it?" Mason's laugh was bitter. "The protocols are designed to fail. The corporations built back doors into every system. Even if you shut down the reactors, the contamination will continue spreading. The ash storms are self-sustaining now." He handed me a data drive, his fingers leaving radioactive burns on the metal surface. "Everything's on there. The real files, the ones they thought they'd deleted. Proof of what they're planning." "What about the reactor core? Can't we force an emergency shutdown?" "The core's been modified. It's not generating power anymore, it's breeding isotopes. Custom-designed radioactive compounds that don't exist in nature. the perfect catalyst for biological engineering. Mason's heart monitor flatlined at 0423 hours. He died with his eyes open, staring at the monitors that showed the contamination spreading across America like a cancer. I spent the next hour in the reactor control room, studying the shutdown procedures. Mason was right, the protocols were designed to fail. Every emergency system had been compromised, every safety measure had been bypassed. The corporations had turned their own nuclear facilities into weapons, and they'd made sure no one could stop them. But they'd made one mistake. The reactor core's breeding cycle required precise temperature control. Too hot, and the isotope production would stop. Too cold, and the whole system would collapse. The cooling modifications were the key. If I could overload the thermal regulation systems, I could force the reactor into an uncontrolled state. It wouldn't stop the contamination that was already spreading. The ash storms were beyond anyone's control now. But I could prevent the facility from producing more engineered isotopes. I could stop them from breeding new generations of radioactive organisms. The process would require manual override of every safety system. I'd have to flood the reactor chamber with coolant, then overload the thermal exchangers. The resulting explosion would vaporize the entire facility, along with anyone inside. It was suicide, but it was the only way to strike back at the corporations that had murdered my family and my world. I'm recording this from the reactor control room. The override sequence is ready. In 10 minutes, I'll initiate the coolant flood. In 15 minutes, the thermal exchangers will reach critical overload. In 20 minutes, there won't be anything left of this place but radioactive glass. The data drive is sealed in a lead-lined container, programmed to transmit its contents to every news organization and government agency on Mason's contact list. The truth about Project Manifest Destiny, about the corporate terraforming program, about the murder of rural America, it'll all be public record. They can't hide what they've done. They can't cover up the genocide they've unleashed. The evidence will survive, even if I don't. Outside, the ash storms are moving east, carrying death towards cities that still don't know what's coming. The mutated creatures are spreading, adapting, evolving into whatever the corporations need them to be. America is being transformed into something alien, something inhuman. But they won't get away with it. The truth is stronger than their lies. The evidence is harder than their ash. Someone will see what they've done, and someone will make them pay. The coolant system is online. The thermal exchangers are charging. The reactor core is beginning to destabilize. This is for Jaden. This is for Miles. This is for everyone who died believing this was an accident instead of murder. This is for the America they tried to kill. Initiating override sequence in 5, 4, 3, 2. Transmission terminated. Emergency broadcast, automated transmission. Date, March 18, 2024. Location, Lone Star Nuclear Facility, emergency beacon. Time, 0447 hours. Automated voice, emergency broadcast activated. Facility containment breach detected. Transmitting final personnel log. Personal log, Riker Kea. Date, March 18, 2024. Location, reactor control room, Lone Star Nuclear Facility. Time, 0442 hours. The explosion didn't kill me. The thermal overload worked exactly as planned. The reactor core went critical at 0427 hours, sending a shockwave through the facility that shattered every window within 5 miles. The cooling towers collapsed, the main reactor building cracked like an egg, and the isotope breeding chambers vaporized in a column of radioactive fire that lit up the Texas sky like a second sun. But the control room's emergency shelter held. Lead-lined walls 3 feet thick, designed to protect personnel during exactly this kind of catastrophe. I survived the blast, survived the initial radiation surge, survived the collapse of everything around me. I'm dying anyway. The Geiger counter says I've absorbed enough radiation to kill a dozen men. My skin is blistering, my hair is falling out, and there's blood in everything I cough up. But I'm still alive, still conscious, still recording. The facility is gone. The breeding chambers are destroyed. The isotope production has stopped. It's not enough to stop the contamination that's already spreading across America, but it's something. One less weapon in their arsenal. The data transmission went out at 0428 hours. Mason's evidence, the corporate files, the proof of Project Manifest Destiny, all of it broadcast to every news organization, every government agency, every activist group on his contact list. The truth is out there now, spreading faster than the ash storms. I can hear them responding. Radio chatter from military units, emergency broadcasts from the CDC, congressional hearings being called into emergency session. The corporations tried to hide their genocide, but the evidence is too strong, too detailed, too damning. They're trying to spin it as terrorist sabotage, as foreign interference, as anything except what it really is. But the financial records are public now. The congressional briefs are leaked. The EPA approval documents are on every news website in the country. The American people are waking up to what's been done to them. Outside, the ash storms are beginning to dissipate. Without the facility's isotope production, the contamination is losing its engineered stability. The geometric patterns are breaking down. The self-sustaining reaction chains are failing. The storms will continue for weeks, maybe months, but they're dying. The mutated creatures are dying too. Without the constant supply of engineered isotopes, their cellular structure is breaking down. Through the control room's cracked windows, I can see them stumbling through the ash, their glowing sores fading, their mutated limbs collapsing. They were living weapons, and without their ammunition, they're just suffering animals. I found Granddad's shelter blueprints in my pack, somehow undamaged despite everything. 3 generations of Kea family engineering, designed to protect people from exactly this kind of disaster. The specifications are hand-drawn, annotated with notes from my grandfather, my father, and finally from me and Jaden. The designs work, even modified with modern materials, even adapted for different terrain. The basic principles are sound. Communities that built shelters based on these blueprints had survival rates 60% higher than standard emergency shelters. I'm uploading the designs to the emergency broadcast system. Every blueprint, every specification, every hard-learned lesson about radiation shielding and air filtration. If more communities are going to face what we faced, they'll need every advantage they can get. The corporation's plan is failing, but the damage is done. Texas is poisoned for decades. The other facilities are still operational, still spreading their engineered contamination across rural America. The fight isn't over, it's just beginning. But now people know what they're fighting. Now they have the truth. The control room's emergency supplies include a shortwave radio powerful enough to reach across the continent. I've been monitoring the emergency frequencies, listening to the reports coming in from other contaminated zones. The pattern is the same everywhere: sudden reactor failures, ash storms, mutated wildlife, mass casualties. But I'm also hearing something else. Resistance. Communities that evacuated in time, government agencies that weren't corrupted, military units that are refusing corporate orders. The genocide isn't going as smoothly as the corporations planned. In Montana, National Guard units are establishing quarantine zones and hunting down corporate saboteurs. In Wyoming, Native American communities are using traditional survival knowledge to outlast the contamination. In the Dakotas, environmental activists are documenting the corporate crimes and broadcasting the evidence worldwide. The corporations underestimated the American people. They thought they could murder us quietly, steal our land while we were too dead to resist. They were wrong. My family's ranch is gone. Jaden is dead. Miles is dead. Mason is dead. 47 people died in the depot collapse, and thousands more are dying across Texas. The corporations got their land clearing, got their mineral extraction zones, got their biological weapons testing ground. But they didn't get away with it. The truth is stronger than their lies. The evidence is harder than their ash. And now the whole world knows what they've done. The radiation is getting worse. My vision is starting to blur, my hands are shaking, and the taste of copper is flooding my mouth. I don't have much time left. I'm thinking about Jaden, about how he worked so hard to maintain Granddad's shelter designs. He believed in the old ways, in the family knowledge that kept us alive through 3 generations of disasters. He died protecting that legacy, and now it's saved more lives than he ever could have imagined. I'm thinking about Miles, about how he organized the evacuation, even though he knew it was suicide. He led those people into the storm because that was the only chance they had, and he stayed with them until the end. He died believing he'd saved them, and maybe that's enough. I'm thinking about Mason, about how he fought the radiation sickness long enough to expose the truth. He could have died quietly, could have kept the corporate secrets buried with him. Instead, he chose to bear witness, to make sure the world knew what was happening. Their deaths weren't meaningless. Their sacrifices weren't wasted. The truth they helped preserve is already changing the world. The emergency broadcast system is set to loop this transmission for the next 72 hours. The shelter blueprints, the survival protocols, the evidence of corporate genocide. All of it will keep broadcasting until the power runs out or someone shuts it down. The ash is settling across the Texas plains, covering the poisoned earth like a radioactive shroud. The storms are dying, the mutations are failing, and the corporate weapons are turning to dust. America is scarred, but America is not broken. The corporations wanted to remake our country into their private extraction zone. They wanted to murder millions of Americans and steal our land. They wanted to turn our home into an alien landscape of radioactive waste and biological weapons. They failed. The truth is out. The resistance is growing. And somewhere in the poisoned ruins of Texas, the blueprints for survival are taking root. This is Riker Kea, last witness to the Kea Ranch, last guardian of the family legacy. I'm dying in the control room of the facility that killed my brother, my friends, my home. But I'm dying free, and I'm dying with the truth. The ash settles, but the blueprints endure. The storms pass, but the evidence remains. The corporations thought they could bury us under their poison, but they only planted the seeds of their own destruction. America will remember what they did. America will rebuild. And America will never forgive. The transmission ends here. The legacy continues. Transmission terminated. Emergency broadcast, automated transmission. Date, March 18, 2024. Location, multiple relay stations, continental United States. Time, 0449 hours. Automated voice, Mason Desbian's evidence package broadcasting on all emergency frequencies. Project Manifest Destiny files uploaded to public servers. Congressional hearings scheduled. Corporate assets frozen pending investigation. Kea Family Shelter blueprints available for download. Survival protocols active. Emergency coordination networks established. The truth endures. The resistance grows. The legacy continues. End transmission.